Now let's take you to the Trump administration, who carried out its ninth federal execution of the year last week. The government-sanctioned death of Brandon Bernard is part of the first series of executions during a presidential lame duck period in 130 years. And joining us now is Sister Helen Prejean, one of the country's top anti-death penalty advocates over the past 30 years. Sister Helen, thank you for joining us. Now, you've spent time with people facing the death penalty. What have they shared with you?
Well, it's an incredible kind of conversation because it's the last one before you're going to die. It's mixed with ordinary things about, would you tell this to my mama? And how many minutes have I got? Because you face an eternity. It's an incredible torture. Let me just say that. It's hidden from people's eyes. But you have a conscious, imaginative person, and all those I've been with were on death row at least 10, 15, 20 years before they were killed. But what I want to say about what's going on now is, see, with Trump, who has the power to kill, and here's what's being illuminated with this spree of executions. There'll be 13 people dead by the time Biden comes on as president. And if, like Lisa Montgomery, who was brutally tortured and abused all through her childhood, did a terrible crime, and they're going to kill her. And if it would be 8 days later when Biden comes on, she wouldn't die. So this thing is held together with baling wire, tape. It has been so skewed from the beginning because the Supreme Court said you're only supposed to pick out the worst of the worst, and then you leave it up to federal or to state prosecutors to pursue death or not. Trump really could have started killing people as soon as he became president because the power was in his hands. And what it's showing us is why we cannot entrust into the hands of government officials this absolute power of life and death. They can't handle it. We can't handle it. Juries can't handle it. Prosecutors can't handle it. And it's time to shut it down, which we're doing in the states. I mean, even our state, deep South state, Louisiana, that executed 8 people in eight and a half weeks, hasn't had an execution in 17 years. The states are shutting it down. But then when you get to the federal jurisdiction, because you have someone who has the absolute power, who's just started killing people at will.
Now, Sister Helen, thank you for sharing that. I think it lays an important foundation. Now, the American Civil Liberties Union, it says that 1 out of 25 people sentenced to death are likely innocent. How do the justice system's flaws play into capital punishment?
Tremendously from square one. Because the Supreme Court set such a fuzzy criteria, the worst of the worst, who knows what that means? An ordinary murder, a garden variety murder, worst of the worst, and then leaves it up to prosecutors. You look at the pattern, it's the deep South states that practice slavery that have done 75% of the actual 1,500 plus executions. When you look at the actual practice of worst of the worst, 8 out of every 10 death penalties is because a white person got killed, even though people of color are 50% or more of the homicide victims in this country. So you have all those biases built in and cultural biases, and then you put it in the hands of the prosecutors. And so this is an amazing statistic, and you may not believe it when you first hear it, but there are 172 wrongfully convicted people, because it's only poor people who are chosen to go after them for the death penalty. 172 wrongfully convicted people have been lucky enough to get off a death row. And this thing is so broken that for every 9 executions of the 1,500 plus, 1 person has to be set free. 1 out of every 9 is wrongfully convicted. For every 9, that's how broken it is, because all the biases are built into it and the discretion's left up to prosecutors. Look at someone like Trump, who values and who his brand is to use force and coercion and intimidation to get what he wants. And I don't know how, but suddenly in July, with Will Barr then as his person to do his bidding, They started killing people and there was nothing to stop them. So it highlights what's wrong with the death penalty. And thank God my Catholic Church at this point has come to a position to say, under no conditions can we ever allow state governments, no matter how grave the crime, to be the arbiters of life and death over human beings. No government can be given that kind of power. And this is a wake-up call for us as a nation, a very teachable moment, I think.
Sister Helen, last question in the very short time that we have left. How do you reconcile that, the fact that the Catholic Church is very much so against capital punishment, with the most recent Supreme Court appointee who supports it, who is a devout Catholic? How do you reconcile those two things?
Let me tell you, I'm shaking my head because I'm going to try really hard in public not to be judgmental. But when people say they're Catholic, and when people say they're pro-life, and yet they are willing to do this kind of killing, it's a very attenuated, they look through a certain prism in terms of what their Catholic faith means. To be for life means to be for life across the board. And then to say that you can approve of government killings. William Barr was even given an award by a Catholic organization not long ago. On September 23rd, the day before it, someone was being executed because he had initiated it. The day after he got the award, somebody was executed because he had initiated it. So what does Catholic mean? And you got to get to the gospel of Jesus. Where can you find in the gospel of Jesus, who said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, and who taught by his life and by his death forgiveness rather than retaliation? Where does that come from? And so people will give religious trimmings to things to legitimate what they're doing, like God's on their side when they do it. But that's not true. What real religion is about, what real faith is about, is compassion. It's about human rights and the dignity of all persons. That's what true religion ought to be about.
Sister Helen, thank you very much for joining us.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.